Welcome to the Art and Science of Complex Sales, proudly presented by Membrain. This podcast is your gateway to mastering the craft of modern selling. If you're passionate about growth, impact, and unlocking full potential in sales and revenue, you're in the right place. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And now let's get started with today's guest. Hey everybody, today we're talking to Mike Simmons, Catalyst Sales CEO, an absolute master of the whiteboard, a person that's committed to building leaders, and one of the people that understands sales process and execution better than anybody I've ever met. Let's get started with Mike Simmons. Mike Simmons, how the heck are you?
I am doing great. Paul, how are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. It's always great when we get a chance to chat. I've been following your stuff on LinkedIn and your whiteboard sessions are absolutely brilliant. So thanks for bringing that to us today.
What's been brilliant about him?
What's been brilliant about him? Mike, you got a really good way of taking a blank sheet of paper or a blank whiteboard and a marker and making things make sense. So I really appreciate that about your work and how you've been sharing that with the world.
We can go from chaos, the chaos of up here and all the other stuff, and even the floating microphone that you've got. We can go from this chaos and shift to clarity, right? Like we could shift to clarity by starting to shave off the things, take all of the things that are unnecessary. I think Bruce Lee talked about it, taking all of the things, pulling all the things together, eliminating the unnecessary, and then making it their own. And Michelangelo, I think, talked about that in the context of building David, like the sculpture of David. He just took everything away that wasn't David and made this amazing sculpture. We get caught up with too much stuff in our head. We struggle with talking about it. And really the reality is if we put it up on a piece of paper or a whiteboard, get it out of our head, we can start to say, that's it. Or, ooh, that's not it. And then we can start to adjust. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to do with it. Simplify the world so that we can help improve execution.
What are some of the core metrics you're seeing that are helpful? What are not? How our business is operating in sales?
Yeah, I think we are definitely overfed with data and undernourished.
What do you mean by that statement?
So we've got all of this information, like we could just kind of consume calories of data, and we'll go into this thing. And as you get older, metabolism doesn't work as quickly as it used to in the day, so you couldn't take as much risk. And if you take on too much risk, you get yourself into situations where you go a little bit too far and now you've got to recover from it. So we'll get away from the food and the nutrition metaphor and kind of move back into the business side of things. But from my perspective, if your business is not growing, you're not achieving the results you want to, there are two key metrics that you need to look at.
Okay.
Pipeline created. So what are we putting at the top? So let's just call it pipeline created, PC. Number one. And the second one is pipeline developed. So if we know what we're putting in the top, new opportunities that we're creating for our business, we know what's happening there, and we know when those things are put in the top, how they move forward to the point where they turn into cash. So let's just call that sales. Before we even get into recognizing revenue and that kind of things. If we know what our pipeline how our pipeline created, what's happening on that side, and we know how things are developed, and we see those actually moving into sales, we can get a better view of where things are inside our business. And it's just two simple metrics. What do you think?
I think I got a lot of questions.
Fire away.
Well, so let's talk about, we have two main metrics. What are the subsets and how do you measure those? Is really where I'm going to. So pipeline developed, what does that mean?
Yeah, so most people will have some kind of sales process, right? And that sales process, if defined properly for the purposes of forecasting, will have different stages where your probability of sale will change. It'll increase as you go deeper into those stages. Is that fair?
Very fair. That's the business we're in. Yep.
Okay. So, all right. So if I've got a sales process for forecasting, and my focus is on forecasting, what I'm trying to do is create predictability in cash. And that predictability happens by going through individual stages. And that could have any number of stages. You could have 1, 2, 3, 4 stages. You could have 6 stages. You could have 10 stages. It all depends on the complexity of your business and how you operate. But each one of those stages, as you move from gate 1, move through this gate into 2, your probability of sale should increase. So let's just say that our probability of sale at 1 is 5. Our probability of sale at 2 is 25%. Our probability of sale at 3 is 75%, and our probability of sale at 4 is 90%. Whatever those stages are, and those are all very personal. Yep. People confuse this. They'll think about sales process in the context of how reps do their job. What's the rep sales process? That is different than this process. This is a process for forecasting. Processes have specific jobs to be done. This one is around forecasting. It's sales process for the specific purpose of forecasting. Each of those stages should, from my perspective, have past tenses associated with them. And then when you've gone through the gate, then now you're at a point where the probability of that deal closing has now increased. Good?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So pipeline developed is the process, is how things go through each of these stages, ultimately getting to closed won, where that's the final stage of it being developed. So that's pipeline developed. Helpful?
Yes. It's essentially milestone completion and stage progression throughout. So what is when we're talking about data and numbers, right? So pipeline developed, what is the actual metrics then that we're taking in that from stage 1 to stage 2? Or are you doing a weighted pipeline, or what is the
it's going to be weighted all the way through. So then you start to look at it and say, over what period of time do I want to look at this? Am I looking at an annual forecast? Am I looking at a quarterly forecast? Am I looking at a total view of the potential business that's out there over an extended term? That extended term can be as long as you want it to be, but your variables are amount, money, using dollar signs. Those could be pound signs, whatever it is. There's a money amount. There's a money number. The next one is probability. So percentage that you're forecasting. So probability of sale, depending on where it is, where any of those deals are. Like if you're doing this for one deal, you're kind of your forecast is going to be thrown off. Like you're saying that I'm going to forecast 50K on a 100K deal where I know the 100K deal is the actual solution. You're not really going to get 50 of that 100K. It's going to throw your forecast off. So you need to have larger numbers here. So if you're doing this on a single deal perspective, you might need to change the way that you look at the information in this pipeline develop stage. But let's assume that we're a team of maybe 10 sellers or 5 sellers. We've got multiple pipelines that have been created and that are in the process of being developed across an overall team. And that might break up into different segments of the business, and things can really start to get complex here. So number 1, we've got number or amount. Number 2, we've got percentage. And number 3, we have time.
Okay.
So timeline. So that's going to be your expected close date. So what's the close date that we put into the CRM? Is it this quarter? Is it next quarter? Is it 10 years from now? Like what's the timeline? So we have an amount, we have a percentage probability based on the stage, and then we have time.
So let's go back to this forecasting, and you said something that was interesting in that to me. Each process has a job to be done, is essentially what I heard you say. Yep. Now, tell me about what does that mean then for this stage 1, 2, 3, 4? What type of actions then are you measuring that take something from 1 to 2 or 3 to 4? Or, I mean, is that something a rep does? Is that something a buyer does? Is it a combination? What are those types of things that you're looking at?
So I'm going to break that down into 2 different pieces, primarily because we've got a conversation going and we're able to do this a little bit longer form in a podcast. Yeah. One perspective is to say, hey, what's the job to be done of each of these stages? The job to be done of each of these stages to have an accurate probability of sale, an accurate view of what we should, what we think the likelihood of getting that deal done is based on how the deals that are inside those stages. So let's use my stages as an example. So these are catalyst sale specific stages.
Yeah.
Validated, 5%. There's a chance. It's past tense. I validated the opportunity. I actually had a conversation, and I can see a scenario where we work with each other. On a 100K deal, I'm forecasting $5,000.
Great. Yep.
Got it?
Yep.
Qualified. I understand the story from the perspective of the customer, the who, what, why, where, when, and how, the problem that needs to be solved. And based on that understanding of the customer, I have actually qualified this as a potential customer that we could actually work with. Not only do I see a scenario where we could work with each other, I actually know a little bit more about what they're trying to do, who, what, why, where, when, how, and now I really do see us potentially entering into a business relationship. So that's going to be qualified. That's, again, past tense. For me, that's 25%. The next one is fit. I've confirmed fit on my side based on our understanding of the problem that they're trying to solve inside their organization. I believe that I've got the right solution. I can solve it for them. Now I move into 50%. Because if I understand the problem, who, what, why, where, when, how, qualified, and I know that we can help them solve that problem, now I think there's 50% likelihood that we're going to be able to put together some kind of a deal. We still have a lot of work to do. The next stage beyond that, and these are all past tense, client confirmed fit. They've got to vote. They actually said, yep, you understand my problem. I actually like your solution, and I believe that you're going to be able to solve. I think we're the right fit for each other. Now we move into 75%. It could be 50. There's going to be a lot of back and forth here as we kind of tailor that type of stuff. And if you really want to go deep into it, I could share a link with Paul so you can show those stages. But you will typically have stages inside your CRM that show where a deal is in that progression. If your deal stages are current tense, I think you're making a mistake. And the reason why I think you're making a mistake is it's hard to determine probability of sale based on something being in a specific a state that has a lot of fluctuation. By using past tense, now we're saying they've already crossed through that gate. It took me a couple of years to figure that out. Once I did, it just started to change the accuracy of forecasting inside the organizations that I work with. We're actually looking at it as a past tense thing. I've moved through that gate. So once I've moved into client confirm fit, now I look at that and I've got, hey, there's about a 75% chance that we're going to be able to get this done. Then we move to proposal approved, 90% chance, because there's always, nothing's done until it's signed. There's always a 10% chance in there that something happens. Somebody gets run over by a bus. Somebody changes. Somebody wins the lottery. Whatever happens. Somebody gets married to somebody who has a different solution that gets in there. So now you move into then you've got this little bit of variance until things are signed, and then closed one is 100%. That's when we're actually at the sale, that sold thing. So the mistake that people make is there's ambiguity on what the definitions of those stages are. They use current tense rather than past tense. And the third thing that I would add in here relative to solving for the ambiguity challenge and looking at past tense is use binary statements, yes, no. So I see a scenario where we could work with each other. That's a yes or no. If yes, you've validated, so you're in 5%. I understand the problem from the perspective of the customer. Mm-hmm. Yes, qualified. If not, you've not moved through that stage. Based on my understanding of the problem, we can solve it. Fit, confirmed on my side. Now we move into that third stage, or 50%. So that's how that works. Is that helpful?
Oh, that's wonderful. And actually, I love it because it's how I generally operate in Membrain and how we recommend as well. I really like that because you can scale that. So what type of behavior changes do you start to see when the organizations you're working with, when you start to just give these very easy binary discussions and tracking it that way? Like what type of results are you seeing in pipeline, in actually flow through and forecastability?
Yeah. So forecastability, accuracy in forecasting improves significantly. The hard part is, well, that's just not how our business operates. Things are a little bit different. When I'm qualified this type of organization, I think the likelihood that I'm going to win this one is 75% because I know that we're going to be able to get there. I just don't know how long it's going to take versus somebody else who it might say, oh, that's 15%. So there's this ambiguity that ends up happening. A lot of people will say, inside my business, that just won't work. I challenge and I push back and say, okay, show me why. Let's work through. Imagine a scenario. What's the specific question that we could ask that demonstrates that I've now walked through the gate and closed it behind me. So now it gets past tense. What's a question that we could ask there that would indicate that I've actually made progress? And typically there you can start to move through some things where you start to say, hey, a customer's made this decision. We've made this decision. I like to separate customer decision-making process from sales process because we control the sales process. They control their decision-making process. So let's look at those three processes differently. That was another question you'd asked. One question is customer decision-making process. If you've ever played the game of life, customer goes from maybe problem unaware to problem aware. So I go from not really even knowing that something's going on to now all of a sudden I'm sad to solution unaware. So I'm still kind of sad. I'm wondering, I've got questions to solution aware. Now I'm happy that I see a vision of the future to I've implemented and I've hit the top of the mountain. And now I'm going to go ahead and shout to everybody else in the world that I've been successful. Right? Like I go through it and work through these stages. Well, what we all know is this isn't just this straight line. There's kind of like ups and downs as things kind of meander and you kind of work your way through each of these individual pieces. But as you go through each of the waypoints on the trail, you are picking up new things. You're picking up new pieces of information. You're starting to build confidence, momentum toward making a decision. That's the customer decision-making process. And when you're mapping it out, think of mapping it out on a board game like the game of life. Starts here, unaware, starts here or ends here, shouting from the rooftop saying, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I want to tell more people about it. And then try to figure out what are each of those steps that someone has to go through and make that as simple as possible so that you on your side understand, hey, these are the decisions that someone's making inside their organization. Now, this gets super complex when you start adding new people into it because you add new people, you add new variables. This is really tough stuff. You can map it out based on your understanding of customers and how they've made decisions and when they decide to buy and all of that other kind of stuff. And you can start to have a process that where if I've moved into this from this solution unaware to solution aware perspective based on their questions, that they're going to be a bit more engaged and they're going to move closer to making a decision because it's hard to make a decision to change something if you don't even know what the change potentially is. So that's game of life. That's customer decision-making process. Fair? Mm-hmm. Okay. Second process, that's one. Second process is this one that we just hit on, forecasting. This is more like chutes and ladders. Like anybody who's listening to this or watching this knows I've gone all the way through to client confirm fit, and then somebody new gets brought into the discussion, and now all of a sudden we have to start over again, or we have to take a couple of steps backward. So we get really excited, we got things working along, and now we have to go backward. From a sales leadership perspective, we struggle with this. Sales leaders, not as much, but senior leaders inside an organization do not understand why things don't just go from one to another. Like, why do things go backward? And this is where people create crap in their forecast. They feel uncomfortable moving things backward because moving things backward is an indication of failure. This is about forecasting. It is not about you did a good job or you didn't do a good job. It's let's be real about what stage we're in based on the new information that we have. So sometimes, I'm sure this has happened to you at some point in your career, you got to lead. I got a live one. Can you send me a proposal? I sent a proposal and now it's in this 90% stage and it just sits there forever. Has that ever happened?
Oh, me never. No, absolutely.
You're smiling, so you've heard of stories where that might happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've heard that story. I've seen that story a lot of times. Yes.
So we go up the ladder and we're super stoked. And then all of a sudden, oh, I got to get this in front of a buying committee, or procurement needs to get involved. Everybody needs to get their piece. And then before you know it, you're kind of working your way backward and saying, okay, let's make sure I really understand what we're trying to solve inside your organization. So that's the sales process for forecasting perspective. These are the sales stages that are in your CRM. I can tell you this: if discovery is a stage in your CRM, you're screwed. You will not be able to forecast effectively. Discovery is not a stage. You are constantly discovering new pieces of information. Discovery is not a stage. If demo is a stage inside your CRM and you happen to deliver multiple demos inside an organization in any of your sales cycles, then demo is not a stage that indicates predictability. It's about you and you feeling good that you checked the box and showed them your capability. Now, those calls, capability call, can help with the decision-making process and then get us into a place where we confirm fit, and then it can enable things to move forward in those stages. So we've got two different processes that we've talked about. The third process, and this is another one, this is where the practitioners who are out there in the field really need to be really clear about what your personal process is. Like, how do you do your work? So for me, it's I identify someone. Step one, I engage with someone. So we know who we want to talk to, either because they raised their hand or we've tapped on them. Engage, establish objectives. Kind of looks like a donut, but establish objectives. Clarify next steps. Call them to action. Call to action. Engage, establish objectives, clarify next steps, call to action. And this is kind of like this is a looping process. This is like Monopoly. I'm always going around the board over and over and over again. Same wash, rinse, repeat, hitting on each of these stages. This is the one where it's super, super tough. If you do your fundamentals over and over and over again, you'll start to see progress both on this side and on this side. The visual that I like to use is that old Tootsie Roll or Tootsie Roll Pop commercial. Like, how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop? I don't know how many times you got to go around the board here to get to where you want to go. That's you. That's personal. Some people take a bite and jump right to the end, and that might make sense. But right now, this is that whole looping process that we run through as sales reps, where we can look back and say, hey, you know what? When's the last time I engaged with them? Did I have clear objectives relative to that engagement? Did we establish next steps? Did I call them to action? Did they actually do the work? So now I've re-engaged, establish objectives, clarify next steps, call to action, re-engage, and just work through that process. So we've got sales rep approach, we've got sales process for forecasting, and then we've got customer decision-making process. And those are the big three that layer into what I would call a revenue operations model.
So you have, let me go through those again real quick, just so I'm on the same page. And for those of you that aren't watching this and just listening, the last one is that personal rep, IEONS. So identify. So how are my tools helping me identify? And how am I helping to identify that I want to talk to you? E is,
Engage.
Which one is E? Engage. So how am I engaging?
So I actually have a conversation. So I identify you, Paul, as a person that I'd like to meet with. So I send some outreach to you. That's that engagement. Ideally, my objective in that is to get a meeting. My desired next steps are confirmation of meeting. My call to action is you book time on my calendar, like all of those things. Like when you reach out to me about the podcast, it was like, hey, Mike, I've engaged with you. My objective is let's get a podcast together. Next step is to grab time on the calendar link. That's the call to action. I went in there and I did that, and now we're here. Okay.
So you have three distinct processes that are working together essentially to make a RevOps system. Yep. And then you have two metrics, right? Two metrics that you're using. But when you talk about this and you say those are the only two metrics that we need, or that those are the ones we should focus on.
Yeah.
I don't think you can unless you have the other things operating. Like, if you just do that, if you just say, this is all I need to do is pipeline development and pipeline created.
Yeah.
But you do it without the fundamentals that you have behind it, I think you're a little lost, right?
Sure. And how do you think that reveals itself?
Oh, stalls. Yeah, I mean, I could tell you exactly. In a bloated pipeline, stalled deals, reps not hitting plan. I mean, forecasts that are absolutely way the heck off, right? Yeah. So you have, and you see it a whole lot, I think, in market, that those are the status quo on a lot of organizations. So you have reps that are like, you have people, executives that are like, oh, reps are forecasting, they're forecasting 100 million. You know what? What's actually going to happen is 25 million. So I'm going to take their forecast. I'm going to rip it all apart. I'm going to redo it on spreadsheets over here. I'm going to run my own formulas, and I get down to my 25 million, and that's what I'm going to be confident.
And look, as a sales leader, we've all been there. Like, I had a different percentage that I applied to my account managers versus my strategic account managers versus my account executives. And I say my back in the day when I was a VP of Americas in a W-2 role. Like, we went through, we did this all in spreadsheets. That was before I got into the past tense type stuff, where then I started to look at it and say, here are the things that can be consistent across all of those groups. This thing that can be consistent are each of those stages. So validated, qualified, fit, confirmed fit, proposal approved, closed won, right? Those can be names, can be the same across everybody in the team.
Yep.
That's the stage stuff. One of the cool things about the way that CRMs work today and the flexibility that we have in those and the ways that you can play around with pipeline is you can have different percentages for each team based on what you know about how that team operates in. And so I could say, hey, for my strategic account team, if it's at this stage, typically our probability of sale is closer to 80% than 65% in new customer acquisition, or 25% in new customer acquisition. I can adjust that. And that's where you can start to really instrument the system and have the tool work for you rather than you work for the tool. And you could do that by geography. You could do that by line of business. I've done it by geography, line of business, roles inside organization. There are ways that you can go through and solve for that. And that's consistency in stage definition, job to be done at the stage, change in probability of sale for each of those stages based on what you know about your actual data. And where it starts to get really interesting is when you start looking at this in the context of how things change based on lead source. Mm-hmm. Right? So now there's so many different ways that you can go and look at it. But I would go back to the key things I'm looking for: pipeline created, pipeline developed. If we get into that challenge that you talked about, which is we're stuck. So we create a lot of stuff, but for whatever reason, it never makes it past validation. Well, all right. So if it's not making it past validation, I don't know that we really have a development challenge. What we have is we might not be creating pipeline from the right sources. Yeah. So then we can work backward from that and say, how do we solve for bringing in the right customers from an ICP perspective, our ideal customer, bringing in what's changed? What's changed inside the market? Zoom probably didn't have a funnel back in 2020 in the month of April. What they had is a straight line, like pipeline thing.
They were essentially injecting right into the veins. Like
they could just put it all the way through.
Yeah.
We could all be so lucky. Today, I think Zoom might be running into some of these problems. They might have things stuck in certain areas because there's more competitors out in this space, and there's different ways that people interact. And a lot of people are using resources like Teams today because they're so caught up in the Microsoft ecosystem, or they're using Google Meet, or there's so many different options that are out there. So depending on on stage of company and what's happening in a market, these things may be a bigger challenge. But if my challenge is I'm not creating enough pipeline, meaning nothing new is being added in, I don't care how good you are at developing pipeline, you're going to run out of you're going to run out of potential fuel at some point in time. So that's why I look at these two specific metrics, because they tell me more about where do I focus time, energy, and attention. I get to make a decision based on the data to say, actually, my problem isn't really this. My problem is actually earlier in the process. It's this. Or my problem isn't this. I'm creating pipeline with my customers. Some of them are moving forward. The velocity isn't as quick. Okay, well, what can we do to adjust there? Are there ways that we can enable our customers to make faster decisions? Are there things that we can do relative to specific problems that we're solving inside the organization to shrink things up, make it much smaller? But by knowing those two numbers, I know where else do I need to shine my flashlight to pay attention to what's working, what's not working, and where are we stuck.
Not to be shamelessly giving a plug to Membrain, but it is actually one of I love the platform, and it is one of the reasons why. So you can start to look at different processes for pipeline creation, very much similar and in the same ways that you look at pipeline development. And then that pipeline development and being able to leverage that across different processes, different products, different areas of the business, but having the same name and stage. Like I used to hate looking at different areas of the business that we were selling different things and not being able to get a consolidated view of what my revenue and forecast actually looks like. Yeah. I would get parts of one business unit does it one way, one business unit does another way, and then account management kind of does it this way. Yeah. But that job, you're talking my language with the jobs to be done and figuring out processes. Now, moving up to the pipeline created, right?
Yeah.
We've spoken a lot on the pipeline development, the pipeline creation. What type of we have jobs to be done there. What type of things are you looking at then as subsets of pipeline created or jobs to be done within that pipeline creation?
Yeah. So then you start to look at, okay, what are my leading indicators for pipeline being created, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so there might be a leading indicator might be number of meetings. A leading indicator might be website traffic, so impressions. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of different things. Like each of these things ideally should lead into pipeline created. The challenge is figuring out what yours are. Like what are your things? The really hard part is if I try to go across a sales team and say, look, you got to make 10 calls to create one meeting. Based on what? Based on my 10 calls? Based on Paul's 10 calls? Based on so-and-so's 10 calls? Like, what are we basing that data on? Let's help our team actually design their specific metrics that they're working toward, their key performance indicators, their personal KPIs that they're working toward that help lead to pipeline being created. Because pipeline is created once. You either turn it on or you didn't turn it on, right? Like it's that thing, mm-hmm. at a number perspective. So this is number of deals created and amount of those potential deals. I understand that people will say, well, the first time I create the pipeline, I don't really have an idea of what the amount is. You do. You can kind of figure things out. You can say, based on previously working with organizations of this size, doing these kind of things, mm-hmm. this is directionally relevant. The beauty of all of this stuff is it's never set in stone. Things are moving constantly. Those variables are moving constantly. The amount is a variable. The time, the close date is a variable. Things get pushed out. Things get pulled forward. Let's look for compelling events inside our organizations that ultimately help us get a better view of time, like fiscal year, quarter MBOs that are in place inside an organization. But on this side, on the pipeline created, what I've got to figure out is, hey, what are some of the sources that I'm using to create pipeline? Where does that conversion happen just before this? And then how can I do more of it? And how does it change from rep to rep?
So the rep to rep leading indicators, that's brilliant, because I love diving in with each rep and focusing on coaching and guiding to their strengths. So that can shift, right? And the rep to rep leading indicators. What can't shift, or at least in my perspective, what can't shift, I'm interested in your opinion on this, is the qualifiers of what comes into the pipeline. Mm-hmm. Like, the organization has to agree on what are the core qualifiers. And a lot of times when I'm working with teams, they have a very hard time doing that. Like, it becomes the art more than the science. And I don't think that's something that can be accepted or that can really drive effectiveness in an organization. How do you work with people on that?
We got to make decisions. Like, let's be really clear about who our ideal customer is, both at a company level or to organization, a people level, roles. Maybe it's not even company level. It might be problems that need to be solved, and the people who have those problems. So it might be role specific, but let's be really clear around what that is. And the reason why that model is so important to me, and I like 4 to 5 binary statements around what ideal is. So, so let's just say it is a company that makes more than 10 million and less than 25 million. So more than 10 million and less than 25. I think I got my greater than less than sign screwed up, but 10 million plus minus 25. They've got 200 people inside the organization, and they're based in North America. Okay, let's just say that that's it. So if these are, then order these in order. So North America might be number 1 because of location. So first thing, company is based in North America, yes or no? 0 on one side, 1 on this side. So I'm only going to work on these companies, none of these companies. Anything that's on that side, I'm cutting off. I'm making a decision so that it's a line of clarity so that I can create focus. Next one might be 200 employees. So they got to be 200 plus employees. Okay. Anything less than 200 employees, they're not part of this. I don't want to talk with those people. Don't spend time reaching out or engaging.
But Mike, they're at 100, they're at 140, and they're gonna grow. I swear. Cool.
All right. So maybe what you do for that specific one is you allow your team to have up to 3 opportunities that they're working on right now that are outside of your ICP, just because it allows them to scratch that itch and it gets the butt mic kind of thing. Like, I like, in the overall scheme of things, if they're working on 20 opportunities over a year, do I care about 2 or 3 other ones that they might want to work on because they think there's a chance? No, I want them to be creative. I want to give them some flexibility. Do I want them to all of a sudden create so much scope where they're trying to manage too much? Absolutely not. I don't. Yeah. So now let's put in some limitations. So we put in some blurry guide posts that allow some flexibility, right?
Yes.
So then the next thing is greater than 25 million and or greater than less than 25 million, greater than 10 million. And this is my ICP. That's where I'm focusing time, energy, and attention. Anybody that's not in that, I really have to be careful about who I allow in. And maybe what I could do is put some guideposts in there and say, you know what, squint a little bit and I'll give you a little bit of flexibility, but you only get 3. And you got to be really deliberate about what you put in there, because I want you to have the creativity. I want you to test. I don't know everything. Maybe you know something else. Maybe they are the first one, and that could be our largest strategic account in the next 5 years, and it's got to start somewhere. Okay, go make it happen.
I like the squint with guideposts. I like the guideposts. Because that is so important. The qualification is so important. Yeah. But creating a system that that allows for creativity. So we're talking about art and science, right? I think you need both. But so you need to be able to test the limits. What I see where people really have trouble is when all they're doing is testing limits. All they're doing is try to be creative. Or on the other side, they're being so rigid that they're missing, potential amazing opportunities. I mean, the larger you can get, the more rigid I think well, I don't even know if that's a true statement. Those decisions have to be, you have to understand where they are. And I think so many people just don't give themselves that gift of that decision-making ability, right? What are the guidelines?
Yeah, we're deciding to cut things off so we can stay focused. I mean, the reality, I don't know, depending on the type of organization that you're in, what would happen if that company took on 200 new customers next month? Would that completely destroy the infrastructure that exists inside the organization and then ultimately bring a lot of other things to a screeching halt? When's the last time you brought on 200 customers in a single month?
Yeah.
Is the objective of trying to bring on 200 customers next month not really the right objective? In order to get to 200, you got to start with one. So let's get focused on how do we bring in the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. So we're adding in this number into here each month. And maybe your goal and objective, maybe one of your KPIs as a rep is, I want to create 3 new opportunities every week, or I want to create 3 new opportunities every month, or I want to create 3 new opportunities every quarter. Whatever that is, like, come up with your number, not necessarily an amount, because we know that that's going to change, but I want to create 3 new. And if each week I'm creating 3 new, some weeks I might get 4, some weeks I might be 2, but if I'm shooting for 3 every week, at the end of a month I've got 12. At the end of a quarter I've got 36. If my win rate is 10% or 5% based on validated opportunity, now I've got, 3.6 new customers at a 10% level on a quarterly basis. Cut that in half for half. You have 1 to 2 new customers, like those kind of things. Let's break the numbers down into something that's small and manageable. Aim small, miss small. Get really, really focused on what we're trying to do and move on to the next. Know that I've got to put it in here before I get a chance to develop it down here.
Yep. And those of you that are listening, you got to put it in pipeline created before pipeline developed. So when we're talking about, when we started this conversation, you were being a little bit provocative, right? Saying there's only 2 that you need to focus on. And that's interesting, but there's only 2 if you need to focus on, if you structure it right.
Yeah. So here's the thing that a lot of people are reporting on. They're reporting on number of activities. How many calls do we do? How many people hit the website? How many whatever. Like, that's the potentially overfed but undernourished. Do you really know how each of those things convert here? If you do, then okay, now you can start to instrument those aspects of the machine. If you don't, then let's start small, focus on the things that are most important to us right now, and keep those things moving forward. Because if right now we're focused on growth inside the business, and you can look at your trends on both pipeline created and pipeline developed, you will be able to see something that's changed over a period of time. And that change over a period of time is either a dip that's trending down, or is something that now has started to come back up, or is something that's laid flat, or something that's done something different. But once you understand those 2 pieces of information, then you can decide, do I need to go through the pipeline created door? Are we building enough? There are a lot of people who think the reason why the business isn't growing is because they're just not putting enough in at the top. They might be putting the same amount in at the top. What might have actually happened is that the business has slowed down because customers have slowed down their decision-making process. That should show up in pipeline developed. And then you could focus a time, energy, and attention there and start to adjust. It's the reason why they've adjusted is because they're concerned. There's too much risk to take on in the business. Is it because there's uncertainty around costs associated with it, depending on what kind of operating environment you work in? Or is it because you're no longer the priority right now? And they've moved into a situation where they've said, look, we have to slow down our purchasing process because we're going to run out of cash on our side. But don't over focus on this if the problem is someplace in here, and don't under focus on this if the problem is up here. Like, that's why I would suggest you go back in and know your numbers. And it's not enough to just know your numbers at one point in time. One point in time is just you're reading the weather for the day. What I want to know are the trends. What's happened over time? If I've got 5 years of business experience, what's happened in each of those 5 years? Where have things changed? How do I know what's the indicator that's going to happen in the business to help me know that I'm going to come out of this trough of death? Or how do I know what do I need to go in there and start changing or doing something a little bit differently? What you might actually find out is there are certain deals that are in this stage that move faster in a certain economic environment because the thing that you're delivering to that market happens to be the priority. And what you might also find out is that you are not creating enough pipeline relative to that specific market. So now you can focus time and attention on finding more customers that meet that piece. That's why I say just those two numbers, I can start to get a better sense for health of the organization and where should we focus time, energy, and attention, and then build out from there rather than just looking at this whole dashboard where I get to cherry pick the numbers that really look good. So those are the ones I'm going to show to the board this month because that's the one that makes me feel like, hey, I'm doing a pretty good job and helps me with self-preservation.
Yeah, and any VP of sales or CRO or anybody that has been in that, you've all been in that situation where you're like, dang, the leading indicators this month looked freaking amazing. Our team just had activity off the charts, right? So yeah, I'm going to show that how good and then the next month it's, oh man, my opportunities created is amazing. But I think that consistency of focus is rather than consistency of optics. Like consistency of optics is I'm going to make myself look good whenever I can possibly look good based on the numbers that they have. How important is it, like let's pivot a little bit to this, how important is it that every executive in the organization, or at least, the CEOs, the CROs, all that, understand these top metrics and what that means to health? Because a lot of times I see it's just, you could talk to a CEO, they don't even know some of the core metrics around sales. They're just looking at the revenue number. But when you're working with organizations, how do you make sure that those are the things that are focused on as core to the business?
It's so hard. This is a hard thing to do, and here's why it's a hard thing to do. In the absence of information, we start to build our own story. Mm-hmm. So if I don't have the information, then I'm going to go build my own view of what's happening. And now I have got this preconceived notion around why we're not growing. This team's not working hard enough. They're just not following up with customers. Whatever. It is critically important for you to get aligned across your team, across each of the functional areas inside the business, and let them know how you're reporting health, the things that are important to you. And here's the piece that a lot of people miss. When you're having that conversation, ask them the same question. How do you report on health in your business? How do you know whether or not you're expanding or you're shrinking? Are things good or are things bad? What are your numbers? What do you care about? How are you measured? We struggle with doing this across functional teams inside the organization. And then ultimately, we go in and we talk about, we got this culture of a family, whatever, or we've got this, we're all aligned and these are what our values are, or whatever the thing is that is happening inside the business. But I really have no idea who does what, or how they do it, or how they know that they're effective, or what impacts their ability to do that. Mm-hmm. When you go in and you share these numbers with people, then you can ask this question. Is there anything you can think about that would help us either solve for this or that? I want to see that increase, or I want to see this increase. Anything that you can do to help solve for it. One of the things that might come up is I've got a target list of 20 companies that we'd love to do business with. These are what all the people on my team are working on, right? Like as an example, I've got 20 companies. Does everybody in the organization know that those are the 20 targets? Does anybody inside that organization know somebody at one of those organizations? Are they excited about the work that you do inside the business and they can make an introduction? Now, could you make a connection there that would actually lead to more pipeline being created? When you operate in silos and you try to hide this from the rest of the organization, you operate sales like it's a black box because we've gone through and we built our revenue architecture engine, or we've engineered our GTM, but we've not communicated across the organization. You're operating in a silo, you're creating risk for your team, and you're not creating opportunity or space for you to leverage the collective intelligence of the group. And when you leverage the collective intelligence of the group, they will get involved, they will get engaged. Or they'll decide not to. And if they decide not to, it's not because you didn't expose them to it, it's because they made a choice on their side. So know your numbers and ask them about their numbers.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I think we're going to end there in terms of the conversation. But one thing I definitely have to ask you is, how do people get in touch with you if they want to dive into this and do this type of work with their own business?
Go to findmycatalyst.com. If you go to findmycatalyst.com, all the information is there. We're really promoting the whiteboard, the guided whiteboard sessions. Like, this stuff is complex. It's tough. It's hard to get the things that are inside our head out onto paper, especially when you're in a group environment. And that's the number one problem that I am focused on solving right now, is how do we improve collaborative meetings, get information out of your head so that you can gain clarity, identify next logical steps, and take them. If you go to findmycatalyst.com, I can help you on that side. And if you've got more specific questions around go-to-market and those kind of things, I can point you to some videos that we've got out on YouTube around those things, or we can direct coaching available. But everything's at findmycatalyst.com.
FindMyCatalyst.com. All right, everybody. I would highly urge you, go check out Mike Simmons, FindMyCatalyst.com. I also know he's on LinkedIn. He does a lot of posting there. Make sure you follow him on LinkedIn. Connect with him if you have a problem that you need to solve and want to get it down on a whiteboard and get some ideas out. I know it's helped me tremendously just in the discussions that we've been able to have. So I really thank you, Mike. It's just really good to sit down with pen and paper and people, and or whiteboard and people, talk through ideas and gain some structure to them. So you're doing great work. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I know you've dealt with a disadvantage, like you're limited on capability. You have this thing that you have to overcome. So I am happy to help people who have to overcome the challenge of being a graduate of the University of Arizona.
Bear down, everybody. Bear down.
Yeah,
yes. Well, we won't. Well, that's a whole nother episode. We're just gonna sling shit at each other and have some fun. But with that being said, bear down. Have an amazing day, everybody. Keep shining bright, and we'll talk to you on the next episode. We'll see you soon.